I'm very pleased to kick off the first panel that will take a look at the invisible battlefield, data, AI, and global influence. Once again, this panel is going to be moderated by Mike Butcher, founder and editor at Pathfounders. He is joined by Annemarie Buzatu, Executive Director for the ICT for Peace Foundation, Philipp Leo, cyber risk expert and partner at Leo and Muhly Cyber Advisory, and last but not least, Dr. Arthur Laudrain, Team Lead and Senior Researcher for Cybersecurity at the Center for Security Studies at ETH Zurich. Let's welcome them to the stage.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for coming back, everybody. Mike Butcher from Pathfounders, formerly TechCrunch. Now, the invisible battlefield. I love the titles they've given to these panels. Awesome. We've really got a fantastic, all the speakers have been brilliant, actually. Really well done to the programmers. Let me introduce Annemarie Buzatu, who is Executive Director of ICT for Peace Foundation, which is an NGO. And you lead policy research, advise governments and multilateral organizations, and deliver capacity building courses at the intersection of peace, security, and technology. Peace is a word we think we need a bit more of, don't we? Would you agree? Thank you. Philipp Leo, a cyber risk expert and partner at Leo Muhly Cyber Advisory. Philipp is part of the Europol's expert network. If you want to chat to him later about his work as a lieutenant colonel in the Swiss Armed Forces Cyber Command, I'm sure he'd love to chat to you. And he was stationed for 2 years as a UN delegate at the North Korean border. So I think you've probably got a few stories, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then finally, we've got Arthur Laudrain, who is team lead and senior researcher of cybersecurity at the Center for Security Studies. Arthur specializes in election interference, disinformation, subversion, all the great stuff, and military cyber operations. Previously, he was the Richard Lounsbury U.S.-France Security Fellow at Stanford University. And so I was just chatting to him backstage and about what's going on between Europe and the US right now. So definitely one to catch later on. Ladies and gentlemen, let's define what we mean by the invisible battlefield. Is it as simple as simply what's going on in cybersecurity these days, or is it more complex than that? Annemarie, perhaps if you would like to kick us off.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for that really easy question. I have a definition just ready here. No, I don't. But what I do think when I think about the invisible battlefield, I think about a space in which perceptions are manipulated, in which even beliefs are changed, are created. And it's not something that is new in terms of human history. This is something in some of the previous panels we've also talked about this, that there's certainly been figures of authority who manipulated opinion, who shared pamphlets, who had decrees, who created different types of information systems. I think what is maybe different about what we're seeing now in the digital age and also with AI is that we have the ability, and actually we are, and many, on different platforms, the ability to not just to give disinformation, but to have tailored disinformation, to have information that is actually just fit for our beliefs based on how we have browsed on different platforms, what we've clicked on. And so they're creating these different bubbles, these different epistemological bubbles where we really are seeing different realities. And so we're moving away from that kind of shared belief, which I think was more or less the case in many of the situations in the past, to really so many different bubbles of belief that puts us against each other in this invisible battlefield. So
we've all been atomized into different groups, even down to tiny WhatsApp groups.
Exactly.
Philipp, what about you? What do you think about what's the invisible battlefield? How do you view it?
The invisible battlefield, for me, it's a modern battlefield. It's about cognition, it's about information, it's about psychology. And modern conflicts don't start kinetic anymore. They can start years before any conflict, any kinetic conflict. So maybe we already are on the invisible battlefield already.
Short and sweet. Over to you, sir.
Well, just to jump on this, I think we're definitely in a struggle, right? Different countries, different groups of interests already in the struggle in that battlefield, and it's not always visible. Sometimes we see a little bit of the tip of the iceberg, but I would agree that we're definitely in a struggle. Now, I will bring a little bit of a conceptual lens, because as academics, this is the first thing we do usually, right? And so when we talk about cyberspace, because this is what we're talking about, right? Everyone knows about the hardware and the logical layers, right? The underlying infrastructure that supports cyberspace internet, right? And Anne-Marie, I think you've really hit the nail here with the cognitive layers, the semantic layers, because these are often forgotten, and it's all about the ideas that are shared, right? We have the data flows, obviously, that's the informational side of it, but it's not just zeros and ones, it's ideas that circulate. And behind these ideas, you have, how that affects people, how they create their beliefs, their opinions, and at the end of the road, how that influences their behavior and their decision-making processes, right? So if you want to have an overarching idea of what we mean by cyberspace and that invisible battlefield, obviously you need to consider these, brick and mortar infrastructure, the undersea cables, the server farms, the cell towers and everything. But this is just the underlying infrastructure. All the less material things, the more abstract things that are more difficult to grasp are, I think, the more important ones to consider today.
Well, so it's quite clearly sort of very multi-layered issue, isn't it? So we're all familiar with, hacking and cybersecurity over the decades of the internet, and so a certain amount of, we were certainly aware, up until a couple of years ago, of things like Hillary Clinton being accused of owning a pizza shop or something, and Macedonian teenagers mucking around on Facebook and perhaps influencing bits and pieces of maybe things here and there. So what's happened since? Let's see, we're approaching 3 years since generative AI has really hit the scene. What is going on with that? I mean, there's the obvious aspects of things like, the ability to generate fake video, but what else is going on under the hood, perhaps, that we can't see in terms of how AI is being applied? Is it just scaling everything up, or is there more to it? What do you think?
So I think what it has done is, even 2016, not that long ago, 10 years ago, though, we had trolls, we had troll farms, we had, but this was hundreds of people, thousands of people who were constantly generating these different messages. Of course, they had research, they had done all kinds of focus. There was information, there were algorithms, there's information from the algorithms that they had that they were able to use, but it was still primarily human generated. And now we have the kind of technologies where you can train agents, or you can have an AI instance that really can take the place of 100 people and also react much more quickly and do it in a more nuanced way, depending on whatever postings that person has expressed, or if there's new information that's come to light, it can react more quickly based on that inference that it gets from the different information that it's getting from. So it's really a back and forth system, much more, I would say, because there's the possibility to react more quickly. I don't know what the rest of my panelists think.
That's a good point. Perhaps perhaps you've got the ability for AI to scale disinformation and attacks, but is there equal scale on the ability to defend?
So the way I see it, it's very much a game of cat and mouse, right? Between the bad actors and the good actors, right? So hostile states and advanced persistent threats, proxy groups, and then governments in charge that have to prevent and deter and disrupt these groups. The problem that we're having, and I don't think that's particularly new, but because we have a lot of emerging tools and techniques that makes it even more important, is that these bad actors are really good at innovating at short cycles. They're really good at sometimes inventing or applying some of these new tools to their processes. So we've seen, for instance, slightly outside of influence and information, but we've seen ransomware groups adopting AI models for their own development operations. And I'm pretty sure that at some point, if that's not already the case, we will see some quasi-autonomous cyber attacks, cyber operations in the long run run by these tools. And so it's really hard to answer your question, right? To anticipate what's the next step is going to be. But what you can, determine with high confidence, I'd say, is that these groups are going to be at the forefront of innovation and are going to take advantage of these tools.
Right, so the bad guys are at the forefront of the information
Well, the bad guys are really good at innovating because they're usually working outside of formal state structures, usually in semi-autonomous groups, sometimes large scale, sometimes low scale.
Right.
So really, really fast innovation cycles, right?
I think the first thing we should do, we should stop thinking with good and bad. It's only a story. We should think about interests. Otherwise, it's blocking us. It's blocking us in our ignorance. So the first thing, we should stop doing that. And then we should see what we are able to do. Because it's about technology, it's about cognition, it's about information. And in that field, I think especially Western European countries are so ignorant in that field at the moment. They want to keep in their echo chambers. And I think it's really hard for our society to break out of these echo chambers.
But just to push back on that a little bit, on one hand, I think, yes, these echo chambers or these values that we have that we say, okay, the Western values and these are holding us back. But on the other hand, I think we are with a challenge that we have a technology that connects us now all around the world with different standards, different values. And then we have to figure out what we are willing to live with. And then I think it's even more important in a democracy where you, especially like in Switzerland, where we are right now, where the beliefs of people are so important. And if you have this kind of manipulation of opinion to believe certain things that are not backed by maybe some of the things that I would like to think, scientific method, or some things that we have in our modern society are, found to be reliable, then where do we go as a society? What will this do to us as a society? I guess that's my question.
I think it's not about how moral we are. We should keep that. That's our core. And we should keep on that. But when we do analysis or we think about this invisible battlefield, we should stop about good and bad, because otherwise it blocks. Sometimes intentions or operations don't match with our narrative, and it blocks us. If something can't be, which shouldn't be, if you get loose of good and bad, it's only about interest. And it helps you so much to understand what really happens in the invisible battlefield.
To what extent do we know where the edge is, Arthur? Because let me tell you sort of an interesting story. I remember during Brexit and the Brexit referendum in the UK, some interesting things started to happen on Facebook groups. Mm-hmm. So I remember a story that was on the BBC about a local Facebook group, which really was just there for people to complain about parking near the local shops. And then all of a sudden, some guy in there started talking about how they should vote to leave the EU. And now was that guy part of something, or what's the early signal? Because and where is the edge? Because it could be something as innocuous about to nudge influence and to nudge opinion in a certain way that might be scalable with AI. But does it go down to like very small things, like whether or not there should be an extra kebab shop on the high street, on the main street, or does it get, more? Where is the edge, and how do you detect it as well in this space?
It's a good example. I was in London in 2016 during the campaign, so I remember it quite clearly. No, so I mean, Russia, for instance, right, to name it, has been pretty successful at using wages in our societies, especially in our democratic societies, and to drive them further. Because what you have to remember is that we're talking about socio-technical systems, right? You have the underlying technology, but in the end, what matters is not really the hardware, right? It's the people. It's what they see, what they talk about, what they think. And Russia, we've seen this in the 2016 referendum, we've seen this about Scotland, we've seen this about Catalonia, about many examples where, also in the US, right, with tensions between racial tensions with the police and things like that. Russia has been really good at, or at least very determined in using these topics that drive societies apart. And Anne-Marie mentioned, the fact that we have these bubbles increasingly, right? And that's part of the issue. And that's, something that we have to work on, is that these groups of thinking, right? These group think, we call them like that. These people don't talk to each other, less and less so. And that means that it's even easier to wage tensions between different groups of people.
You mentioned that people living in bubbles now, and I remember specifically back in the day, Facebook reorienting around groups, and now we've seen rises of, and now we're seeing lots of people in like groups, Telegram groups, WhatsApp groups, whatever, and now of course we now see people almost in bubbles inside AI chat and kind of going down rabbit holes on their own or whatever. What is your advice, and what's your thinking at your foundation about how you might be able to break people out of those bubbles, or give them, more proper information, or influence them in certain ways? And how do you think about that, and how do you advise that, or do you?
Well, we do try. We do teach courses on this, but I think what I would want to take a step back first and say, and you mentioned the interests that different people have. I think one thing that has been really, there's been a lot of success in this kind of different silos and these different bubbles, is actually detaching the interest from the cause. So if I am complaining about something, and I'm in a situation where I feel that things are unfair, or I didn't get the right job, or I didn't whatever, and yet there are messages that tell me it's because of the immigrants, or it's because of the whatever laws that were passed. And so we disconnect the cause from our actual grievances. And so we think it's in our interest to then protest against this or vote against that, when it's actually not in ours. And I think that's one of the things that this kind of information warfare on this invisible battlefield has been very successful. It's disconnecting the cause from the effect, and then really, pinging on our grievances and saying it's because of this and it's because of that, and then the other interest is why do they want that? What kind of? And I think we could have a long discussion about that. Now, what can you do? First of all, we need to understand that, and that's what we also try to do. We've written papers about it, and we teach classes as well. But the thing is that ultimately, we need to also incorporate this in our education system, where we become the ones, as the primary consumers of this information, that really look at this information with skepticism, which really don't just take something on board because it sounds right or it agrees with us, that does the kind of research and the checks on these things. Now, this needs to become a reflex, just a natural reflex, but we are in this in-between a new stage where it hasn't been really incorporated into our...
Is it a case of something that it's very, very hard to deal with at an informational and a cyber level? And actually the answer is inoculation. Where, for instance, there's studies found that disinformation travels far less in countries like Finland, for instance, where they are teaching at high school level how to understand influence in inside social networks. What do you think, Philipp and Arthur?
I totally agree on that. Is education is the key. We shouldn't invest in censorship, but we should invest in people, that they are able to recognize if something is not working well or not fine. So I think investing in people, in education, is one of the most important programs we should invest more.
Mm-hmm.
So you've mentioned inoculation. I think it's an interesting approach. We've seen some experiments that show that you can actually use AI, right, like large language models, to have a discussion with some people to kind of bring two bubbles closer together. Maybe not completely create that bridge between communities, but at least, bring them a little bit together. And I think that's a good example.
Overlap for.
Yeah, so it's an overlap of an AI topic, right? The new tools that we have at our disposal that are being used against us, but also that can be useful from a resilience and a defensive purposes, and the issue of disinformation, radicalization, and everything. So I think that's a good approach.
Just to follow up on that, and this is not based on research, it's more of a feeling. I feel that there are some social media platforms that are more about actually bringing together, maybe like LinkedIn or something, because it's in the interest to bring business people together to make connections. And so I think it would. Are there studies that actually look at these kind of algorithms that could be more in, not exploiting the differences between the people, but actually more the commonalities of the people? And it seems like we should be doing more of that. But
so the issue is then algorithmic transparency. Right?
Yeah.
Because these big social platforms, this is a trade secret for them. And it might also not be in their interest, if we're talking about interest here, their financial interest, to bring people together. Because they've realized, and then we've realized in the research community that what creates more engagement, more interaction, are more negative sentiments and feelings, and that's a huge issue because that's a very strong example where the market incentives go against the interest of society, I believe, and that's a typical example where that requires regulation.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's also transparency is really important because many of these platforms put in censorship, not officially, but they restrict opinions. So I think
shadow bans, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really important to keep it open, and it has also a negatives part, like you see it on X, but still, I think it's very complicated in that field, and it's not easy to find the balance between censorship and openness.
Yeah, and that debate has risen a lot in places like the UK recently, of course, because we had the issue where Grok AI was being used to create sexualized images of children and especially of women as well. And there was the incident, I think, about a year ago, roughly, when a Brazilian judge said that X was being used to influence elections, and it was nearly banned in Brazil. The UK Prime Minister, as a result of Grok's behaviour, and the user's behaviour and using Grok, shall we say, was talking about whether or not what sort of restrictions should be put on X as well. So these things are just going to come up again and again, I think, over the next few years. We are definitely quite clearly facing the issue of where private companies like X, of course, are operating at the scale kind of reserved for states, effectively. So, and you made the point about not shutting down and not banning and not creating censorship, and I think I would concur. Many others would concur. But what are the kind of tools that we've got to allow companies to create better behaviors, shall we say, and still have a business model? Is the answer different kinds of social networks, encouraging people to use different kinds of social networks? We've seen actually somebody launch something called W Social here while we've been at Davos, which I think is using the Blue Sky protocol. So, and that's sort of a decentralized approach. What sort of tools and things can we do to nudge companies to, create better behaviors. Do you have any thoughts?
Again, I think it's about being more transparent and bringing these things out into the open. If we are more aware, we users also, of how we're being manipulated, I think that we would be more demanding to have these kinds of technologies that are more transparent or more open. Now, from a business point of view, I think the truth is that negative engagement is something like 6 or 8 times what positive engagement, and many of these are really misleading, and they go viral. So, and that of course drives advertising and money to the platforms. So there's really this tension between something that's really misleading or outright false and what is making money for the company. But so again, I think that goes back also to the user. I mean, we have these it's interesting. If you have a driver's license, you had to take lessons, you had to pass a test, and it's dangerous. You could have an accident, you could hurt people. But we basically have machines that are so powerful and that are evolving so quickly, and then now with AI to a point, and all we have to do is buy it. We don't have to take any kind of tests or have any kind of awareness of how to use this in a responsible way or how to beware for these kinds of disinformation campaigns, for example. So I do think that education is primary, and that we need to understand that these are powerful, powerful machines that you really can.
Is the Australian option whereby they're banning under 16s from using social media the answer? Anyone else? Is that the answer?
I don't think it will work, really. I mean, I'm sure it will diminish some usage, but I think still most important is before anybody gets a smartphone, that they should have some basic course for use of how to use it in a responsible way, what to look out for, what are, scams, how they could be manipulated, these kinds of things, because we are getting this technology. We are not evolved quickly enough, most of us, to really be aware of the risks and to be able to use them in a responsible way.
We should also strengthen the families. I think education in that field should start within the family. It's not something the state or the government should put restrictions on it, but I think it's really important that families take care for their kids, because families are so influential to their kids, and we should start there.
Right. But of course, obviously, we've also got boomers on going a little bit crazy as well, whether or not there should be restrictions at the other end. Do you think that we've got just a couple of minutes left, do you think that digital sovereignty is an answer in some way, or would that create more atomization of networks? Would be a good thing for preventing information warfare?
So digital sovereignty is one of the big issues that we tackle in our team, and that's something we're going to invest time and efforts on. There's a lot to unpack. Obviously 2 minutes is not enough, but we're starting with open source software because we believe that, as we mentioned, transparency, whether that's the algorithms or the code, is a huge start. For several reasons. One of them is that you can also modify and adapt the tools for yourself, and you are not dependent or less dependent on big companies that might have a monopoly in the area that you're investing in.
We are also big proponents of the open source models, which have gotten increasingly better. And also Switzerland now has its sovereign model, which is hosted in Switzerland. I think one of the things that's really important when you talk about sovereignty, AI, and data sovereignty is that it's just like who controls the information, where is it stored, who has access to the information, and who is also adding to that information, whether algorithms or otherwise. And so if you can do that within for example, in Switzerland, you have that under and do it transparently. I think that is the way to go.
Do you have a final thought on that?
I think digital sovereignty is a really complicated field, also a bit of a luxury, because we live in a global world. We're interconnected, and going back to somewhere we are living in a cave gets a bit complicated. Even with open source libraries or tools, it's a way we could try that out, but it just changes the attack surface. It doesn't make everything. It's not a solution for everything, but it will change your attack surface, and most likely the other side will adapt.
It's not a magic solution. That's
No, absolutely not.
Well, there you go. Well, we could go on for quite a long time about this subject because there's so much to be discussed. I think it is very exciting, actually. I agree with you with what's happening in Switzerland, creating much digital sovereignty and sovereign LLMs. It's something I think that will be kind of be an interesting test case for other countries. I'm sure we'll be watching very, very closely. Ladies and gentlemen, please say thank you to Anne-Marie Buzatu of ICT for Peace Foundation, Leo from Leo Muhly Cyber Advisory, and obviously Dr. Arthur Laudrain, who from the Cybersecurity Centre for Security Studies. Thank you. Thanks very much.